Marcus froze at the sudden screech of tires against asphalt. The police cruiser had pulled up alongside him with alarming speed, its blue and red lights silently flashing in the golden afternoon sun. His 14-year-old heart pounded against his ribs as the officer's door swung open. Echo, his chocolate Labrador, sensed the tension and began barking nervously, tugging at the leash wrapped around Marcus's trembling hand. "Gee. Police don't move." The officer's voice cut through the peaceful suburban quiet. Marcus watched in terror as the officer's hand instinctively moved to rest on his holstered weapon. "Control that dog, now." Marcus tugged Echo closer, his voice a frightened whisper. "It's okay. Boy, sit. Please sit." The dog, picking up on his master's fear, whined, but reluctantly lowered his haunches to the sidewalk. The officer approached cautiously, his face tense. "What are you doing in this neighborhood? We got a call about someone suspicious lurking around these houses." "I live here, sir," Marcus managed, his voice cracking. "Just walking my dog after finishing homework." He pointed weakly toward a modest two-story home 3 doors down. "That's my house, right there." The officer's eyes narrowed with skepticism. "I need to see some ID." "I'm 14. I don't have an ID yet." Marcus's voice was barely audible as neighbors began peering through windows and stepping onto porches. Shame washed over him, standing there like a criminal on a street he'd walked 1,000 times. "Place your hands where I can see them." The officer's command left no room for debate. 90 minutes earlier, Marcus had been seated at his desk, struggling through algebra equations. The afternoon sun streamed through his bedroom window, casting golden rectangles across his textbook. His mother, Dr. Janelle Washington, had been working from home that day, preparing a lecture for her university students. Their move to Oak Ridge Heights 6 months ago had been a fresh start after his father's death, a chance to heal in a community known for its excellent schools and safe streets. "Mom, I'm taking Echo for his walk," Marcus had called out, already clipping the leash to the dog's collar. Echo's tail wagged with anticipation, his whole body wiggling with excitement. "Back before dinner, please," Dr. Washington replied from her home office. "And don't forget your phone." Marcus had nodded, patting his pocket to confirm the presence of his smartphone. "Got it. We'll just do our usual route." The usual route was a 15-minute loop through their subdivision down Maple Street, around the small community park, and back via Elm Drive. Marcus knew most of his neighbors by now, at least by sight, if not by name. Mrs. Chen always waved from her garden. Mr. Patel often stopped his car to ask about Echo. The Rodriguez kids sometimes joined Marcus for part of the walk. Today, however, he had noticed the woman watching him from behind her pristine curtains at number 42. She'd moved in recently and kept to herself. Marcus didn't know her name, but he'd seen her at the mailboxes. Her lips pursed in what seemed like perpetual disapproval. When their eyes met briefly through the window, she'd quickly stepped back, letting the curtain fall. "Come on, Echo," Marcus had said, picking up the pace. Something about the woman's gaze made him uncomfortable. What Marcus couldn't have known was that inside number 42, Patricia Whitfield was already reaching for her phone, her fingers trembling with what she would later describe as civic concern. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. There's a suspicious person walking back and forth in front of houses on Maple Street, Patricia reported, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. I think he might be casing the neighborhood. He's been passing by multiple times, looking at houses. Can you describe this person? Patricia hesitated only briefly. Young black male, probably late teens, with a large dog. He keeps circling around. I don't recognize him from the neighborhood. Is he displaying any threatening behavior? The dispatcher asked. Well, no, not exactly, Patricia admitted. But he doesn't belong here. I've lived in this area for 3 weeks, and I've never seen him before. I think he's stalking the houses, looking for opportunities. The dispatcher promised to send an officer to investigate, and Patricia returned to her window, watching with narrowed eyes as Marcus and Echo continued their innocent walk, completely unaware of the trouble brewing. Now, with his hands raised and Echo whimpering beside him, Marcus fought back tears. I didn't do anything wrong, sir. A second police car pulled up, and the growing audience of neighbors multiplied. Some were recording with their phones, others whispering among themselves. Marcus had never felt so exposed, so judged. We received a report of suspicious activity. The officer continued, still maintaining his distance. Someone watching houses, possibly planning a break-in. I was just walking my dog, Marcus repeated, his voice steadier now, indignation beginning to replace fear. I do this every day. What's your name? Marcus Washington. And where exactly do you live? Marcus pointed again. 1487 Maple Street. The blue house with white trim. The officer gestured to his partner. Check it out. As the second officer headed toward the Washington residence, an older woman emerged from the house next door to the Washingtons, Mrs. Rossi. An Italian grandmother who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, marched toward the scene with surprising speed for her 70 years. What are you doing to Marcus? She demanded, her accent thickening with anger. This boy lives here. I watch him walk that dog every day. The officer held up a hand. Ma'am, please stay back. We're conducting an investigation. Investigation of what Mrs. Rossi wasn't backing down. Of a child walking his dog. Is this what police do now? Other neighbors were approaching now. Mr. Chen from across the street. The Patel family from the corner house. Even teenage Zoe Rodriguez and her little brother Miguel had ventured out to see what was happening. I know this young man, Mr. Chen stated firmly. His mother is a professor at the university. The second officer returned, looking slightly embarrassed. The house is registered to Dr. Janelle Washington. There are family photos inside that appear to include the suspect. Suspect, Mrs. Rossi practically spat the word. He is a child, not a suspect. The first officer's radio crackled. He listened for a moment, then reluctantly lowered his hand from his weapon. Dispatch says the original caller is Patricia Whitfield from number 42. Every head turned toward the pristine colonial-style house, where Patricia now stood on her porch, arms crossed defensively. He was suspicious, she called out, going back and forth, watching houses. I was walking my dog. Marcus's voice broke with frustration. He walks that road every single day, Mr. Patel added. Around the park and back. My wife gives him cookies for the dog sometimes. The crowd of neighbors grew larger and more vocal. The officers, realizing the situation was spiraling, began to back down. The first officer awkwardly cleared his throat. You're free to go, son. Sorry for the inconvenience. But the damage was done. Marcus stood frozen on the sidewalk, the leash tight in his grip, as the officers retreated to their vehicles. The crowd of neighbors didn't disperse. Instead, they encircled Marcus protectively. offering words of support and outrage on his behalf. By now, Dr. Washington had emerged from their house, alerted by the commotion. She ran toward her son, her face a mask of fear and fury. "What happened, Marcus? Are you okay?" Before Marcus could answer, Mrs. Rossi jumped in. "That woman called the police on your boy for walking his dog." She pointed accusingly at Patricia Whitfield, who was now retreating into her house. "Doctor?" Washington's eyes widened as she took in the scene: the departing police cars, the gathering of neighbors, her son's tear-streaked face. She pulled Marcus into a fierce hug, then held him at arm's length, checking him for injuries. "Did they hurt you?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled rage. Marcus shook his head. "They just scared me." And Echo. The dog was still trembling against his leg. Dr. Washington straightened up, her academic demeanor giving way to maternal ferocity. "This is unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable." The incident might have ended there, an ugly moment in an otherwise peaceful neighborhood, but Patricia Whitfield wasn't finished. As the crowd began to disperse, she emerged from her house again, marching toward the Washingtons with her phone held aloft. "I have every right to call the police when I see something suspicious," she announced loudly. "This is about safety, not race." The neighborhood collectively inhaled. Dr. Washington turned slowly, her expression dangerously calm. "Excuse me." Patricia faltered slightly but pressed on. "I didn't know he lived here. He looks older than 14, and I've never seen him before." "So you called armed officers on a child because you, a new resident, don't recognize him?" Dr. Washington's voice was measured, precise. "Did you consider introducing yourself first? Asking a question? Waving hello?" "I was being cautious," Patricia insisted. "There have been break-ins in nearby neighborhoods." "Mr. Chen stepped forward. "Not here. Not in 5 years." "You put my son in danger." Dr. Washington continued. "Do you understand that? Do you comprehend what could have happened if those officers had been more aggressive? If my son had panicked? If his dog had lunged?" Patricia's face flushed. "I was following the neighborhood watch guidelines. If you see something, say something." "You didn't see anything," Mrs. Rossi interjected. "You saw a black boy and assumed the worst." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek SUV. A man in an expensive suit emerged: Gregory Whitfield, Patricia's husband. He looked confused by the gathering outside his home. "What's going on here?" he asked, approaching cautiously. Patricia rushed to his side. "These people are harassing me because I called the police about a suspicious person." Gregory's expression shifted from confusion to concern as Mr. Patel quickly filled him in on what had transpired. When the explanation concluded, Gregory closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "Patricia," he said quietly, "we talked about this. After what happened in Westview." Patricia's face went white. "That was different. I was right to be concerned that time." "No, you weren't," Gregory stated flatly. "And we had to move because of it." He turned to Dr. Washington and Marcus. "I am deeply sorry for my wife's actions. Truly." The revelation hung in the air like a thundercloud. The Whitfields had moved because of a similar incident in their previous neighborhood. This wasn't Patricia's first false report. Dr. Washington regarded them both coldly. Your apology doesn't erase the trauma my son just experienced. This isn't over. She put her arm around Marcus's shoulders. Come on. Let's go home. As they walked away, the neighbors gradually dispersed, but the tension in the air remained. Something fundamental had shifted in Oak Ridge Heights that afternoon. Inside their home, Marcus collapsed onto the couch, finally allowing the full force of his emotions to surface. Echo climbed up beside him, sensing his distress and pressing close. "I was so scared, Mom," he whispered, when he put his hand on his gun. Dr. Washington sat beside him, pulling him close. "I know, baby. I know." Her academic composure had crumbled, replaced by the raw fear of a mother who understood too well the dangers facing her black son in America. "Why did she call the police on me? I wasn't doing anything wrong." Some people see what they expect to see, not what's actually there. Dr. Washington explained carefully. "But I want you to know something important. What happened today was wrong. Not just unpleasant or unfair, fundamentally wrong. And we're not going to let it stand." That evening, as Marcus finally fell into an exhausted sleep, Dr. Washington made a series of calls to her attorney, to community activists she knew through the university, to the police department requesting body camera footage. By morning, she had a plan. The following day brought unexpected developments. First, a delivery of homemade cookies from Mrs. Rossi, along with a note expressing her outrage and solidarity. Then, Mr. Chen arrived with his teenage son, offering to accompany Marcus on dog walks until he felt comfortable again. The Patel family brought dinner. The Rodriguez children made a hand-painted sign that read, "Marcus and Echo belong here," and planted it in their front yard. What none of them expected was the email that circulated that afternoon from the Oak Ridge Heights Community Association, calling for an emergency town hall meeting to address recent neighborhood security concerns. The message was vague, but Dr. Washington immediately recognized it for what it was, an attempt to legitimize Patricia's actions under the guise of community safety. "They're trying to control the narrative," she told Marcus, "but we won't let them." As news of the incident spread, more neighbors reached out to the Washingtons. Some admitted they'd witnessed the confrontation, but had remained silent. Others expressed shame at not intervening more forcefully. A few confessed to having their own uncomfortable encounters with Patricia in her short time in the neighborhood. The most surprising visitor was Gregory Whitfield, arriving alone at the Washingtons' door 2 days after the incident. "May I speak with you?" he asked Dr. Washington. "Just for a few minutes." Reluctantly, she invited him in. Marcus watched warily from the kitchen doorway as Gregory perched awkwardly on the edge of their sofa. "I wanted to apologize again," he began, "and to explain, though there's really no adequate explanation." "I'm listening," Dr. Washington said, her arms crossed. Gregory sighed deeply. "This isn't the first time Patricia has done this. In our last neighborhood, she called the police on a Hispanic landscaper working at our neighbor's house. Before that, it was a Middle Eastern family having a barbecue in a public park. He hesitated. "She's in therapy, but progress is slow." "Your wife's progress put my son in danger," Dr. Washington replied coldly. I know that, and I'm not defending her actions." Gregory looked directly at Marcus. "Young man, what happened to you was inexcusable. I'm deeply sorry that my wife's prejudices caused you pain and fear." Marcus simply nodded, unsure how to respond. The town hall meeting. Gregory continued. I want you to know I'm not supporting Patricia's position. In fact, I've told her I'll be speaking in support of your family. Doctor, Washington's eyebrows rose in surprise. That can't be easy for you. My marriage has been difficult for a long time, Gregory admitted. This might be the breaking point. But that's not your concern. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in my household shares Patricia's views. After Gregory left, Doctor, Washington turned to Marcus. What do you think? Marcus considered the question carefully. I think he feels bad. But I also think he's known who his wife is for a long time and didn't do anything until now. Doctor, Washington smiled sadly. When did you get so wise? When a police officer put his hand on his gun while looking at me, Marcus replied softly. The night of the town hall meeting arrived with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the community center. Nearly every resident of Oak Ridge Heights had turned out. Dr. Washington and Marcus entered to a hush that quickly gave way to supportive murmurs and nods from many of their neighbors. Patricia and Gregory Whitfield sat on opposite sides of the room, a visual representation of the division in their marriage. Howard Tanner, the Community Association president, called the meeting to order with visible discomfort. We're here tonight to discuss community safety and recent events that have raised concerns. Patricia immediately raised her hand. When recognized, she stood and addressed the room with rehearsed poise. I know many of you are upset about my decision to call the police last week. I want to be clear that my actions were motivated solely by concern for our community's safety. We all have a responsibility to report suspicious activity. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Rossi didn't bother raising her hand before speaking up. There was nothing suspicious except in your imagination. Howard tried to maintain order. Please, let's keep this civil. Doctor, Washington rose next, her presence commanding the room's attention. I'd like to address what suspicious means in this context. My son was walking his dog on his own street, something he does daily. The only thing that made him suspicious to Mrs. Whitfield was the color of his skin. That's not true, Patricia protested. I didn't even mention race when I called. Actually, you did. The new voice belonged to Officer James Rodriguez, who had entered the room quietly. He stepped forward. Mrs. Whitfield, the 911 call transcript clearly shows you identified the suspicious person as a young black male. That was the first descriptor you used. The room fell silent. Patricia's face flushed crimson. Officer Rodriguez continued. I wasn't on duty that day, but as the community liaison officer for this district and as a resident myself, I felt it was important to be here tonight. The officers who responded have been counseled about their approach. They should have de-escalated more quickly once it became clear there was no threat. He turned to Marcus. On behalf of the department, I apologize for how you were treated. Marcus nodded acknowledgement, uncomfortable with being the center of attention, but appreciating the validation. Gregory Whitfield rose next. I want to publicly state that I do not support my wife's actions. What happened was wrong, profoundly wrong, and it's part of a pattern of behavior that I've enabled for too long by remaining silent. Patricia gasped audibly. Gregory, how dare you? No, Patricia, how dare you? His voice was firm. You've done this before. In Westview. In Pinecrest before that. Every time. You see threats where none exist, but only when the person has a different skin color than you. The revelation hung in the air. This wasn't an isolated incident. but a pattern. Neighbors exchanged glances, connecting dots, remembering other comments Patricia had made since moving in. Howard Tanner, sensing the mood of the room, tried to pivot. Perhaps we should discuss how to better integrate new residents into our community, to prevent misunderstandings. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Doctor, Washington interrupted, her voice steely. Let's be absolutely clear. This was racial profiling, and it put my child in danger. The officer had his hand on his weapon while confronting a 14-year-old boy walking his dog. Do you understand how easily that could have ended in tragedy? The room was silent as her words sank in. I've filed a formal complaint with the police department, she continued. I've also consulted with my attorney about legal action against Mrs. Whitfield for filing a false report and against the Homeowners Association for creating an unsafe living environment by failing to address known discriminatory behavior. Howard sputtered. Now wait just a minute. The association had no knowledge of... 3 residents have already provided statements saying they reported concerns about Mrs. Whitfield's comments at the pool last month. Dr. Washington countered. Comments specifically about keeping the neighborhood a certain way. The association did nothing. The meeting erupted into multiple conversations. Some defended Patricia, suggesting she had a right to be cautious. Others shared their own experiences with her subtle and not-so-subtle prejudices. A few tried to find middle ground, speaking of better communication and community understanding. Throughout it all, Marcus sat quietly beside his mother, watching the adults argue about whether his humanity should be obvious or debatable. Echo lay at his feet, occasionally nudging his hand for reassurance. Finally, Zoe Rodriguez, the teenage girl from down the street, stood up. At 16, she was one of the youngest people in the room, but her voice cut through the noise. You're all missing the point, she said clearly. Marcus is my friend. He helps me with algebra during study hall. He shared his lunch with my little brother when Miguel forgot his. He volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends. And all of that shouldn't matter. But apparently it does, because some of you need to be convinced that he deserves basic human dignity. She turned to face Patricia directly. You made our neighborhood less safe, not more safe. You made it so Marcus is afraid to walk his own dog on his own street. How is that making anyone safer? The simplicity of her question silenced the room. In that moment of quiet, Gregory Whitfield made a decision. Patricia, I'm filing for divorce. I'll be staying at the Oak Ridge Inn starting tonight. He turned to the Washingtons. And I want to make this right, as much as possible. I'll cover any legal expenses you incur related to this incident. It's the least I can do after years of enabling behavior I knew was wrong. Patricia stood, shaking with fury. You're choosing them over your own wife, over community safety. I'm choosing basic human decency, Gregory replied quietly. Something I should have done long ago. Patricia stormed out, her heels clicking angrily across the linoleum floor. The room watched her go in silence. Howard Tanner cleared his throat. I think we should adjourn for tonight and... No, interrupted Mrs. Chen, who had been quiet until now. We need to vote, right now, on whether Patricia Whitfield should be fined under Section 8 of the Community Bylaws for creating a hostile environment. Howard looked stunned. That section hasn't been invoked in 20 years. Mrs. Chen finished. Yes, I know. I helped write it. And it exists precisely for situations like this. The vote was decisive, 78 in favor, 5 opposed. Patricia Whitfield would be fined the maximum amount allowed $10,000, with the money to be donated to a legal fund for victims of racial profiling. As the meeting broke up, neighbors surrounded the Washingtons with offers of support, playdates for Marcus with younger siblings, invitations to dinner, commitments to join him on dog walks. What had begun as an isolating, traumatic experience had transformed into a powerful bond with their community. Outside in the warm evening air, Marcus found himself standing beside Officer Rodriguez. "You okay, kid?" the officer asked gently. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Not really, but I think I will be." Rodriguez nodded. "That's fair. Listen, I have a nephew about your age who's starting at the animal shelter. Maybe you two could volunteer together sometime." "Yeah," Marcus said, feeling something like hope flutter in his chest. "I'd like that." 2 weeks later, Marcus stood at the end of his driveway, Echo's leash in hand. He'd been avoiding their usual walk, taking Echo only to the backyard since the incident. But today, with the sun shining and a gentle breeze rustling through the maple trees, he felt ready to reclaim his routine. As he hesitated, the front door of Mrs. Rossi's house opened. The elderly woman emerged, tying a scarf around her silver hair. "Perfect timing," she called out. "I was just about to take my constitutional. Mind if I join you and Echo?" Marcus smiled, recognizing the kindness for what it was. "We'd like the company." They had barely reached the sidewalk when Mr. Chen waved from across the street. "Wait up! I need to drop this book at the library. I'll walk with you part way." By the time they reached the park, their group had grown to include Zoe and Miguel Rodriguez, Mr. Patel's younger daughter Priya, and 2 other neighbors Marcus knew only by sight before the incident. Echo pranced happily at the center of this impromptu parade, clearly enjoying the attention. As they rounded the corner past number 42, now sporting a "for sale" sign on the lawn, Marcus felt a strange mixture of emotions. Fear was still there, a newly learned caution he suspected would never fully disappear. But alongside it was something stronger, the certainty that he belonged here, that this community would stand with him. Dr. Washington watched the procession from their front porch, coffee mug in hand, throat tight with emotion. Her phone buzzed with a text from her attorney. Patricia Whitfield's motion to dismiss the civil suit had been denied. The case would proceed. Justice was coming, slow but certain. And in the meantime, her son was walking his dog in the sunshine, surrounded by neighbors who had become something more: allies, protectors, friends. As Marcus looked back and waved, Dr. Washington raised her mug in salute. They would be okay. Different. Perhaps innocence lost can never be fully regained, but okay. Even, possibly stronger. When the walking group returned an hour later, they were laughing. Mrs. Rossi was regaling them with stories of neighborhood antics from decades past. Marcus's face was relaxed, his smile genuine. Echo trotted proudly beside him, occasionally looking up as if checking that his human was truly happy again. That evening, as sunset painted the street in gold and pink, the neighbors gathered spontaneously on the Washingtons' front lawn. Someone brought folding chairs. The Patels arrived with samosas. The Rodriguez family contributed homemade horchata. Mrs. Rossi's famous cannoli appeared on a silver platter. Children chased each other across adjoining yards, while Echo watched with alert interest. Dr. Washington surveyed the scene with wonder. "I didn't expect this," she murmured to Mrs. Chen. "After what happened, I thought we might need to move." Mrs. Chen shook her head firmly. That would mean she won. We won't allow that. Besides, added Mr. Patel, overhearing, this neighborhood belongs to all of us, not just those who've been here longest, or who look a certain way. Marcus, sitting cross-legged on the grass with Zoe, Miguel, and Priya, felt a sense of peace he hadn't expected to find again so soon. The fear wasn't gone. He still tensed when police cars drove by, but it was no longer controlling him. Hey! Zoe nudged him, nodding toward the street where a moving van was backing into the driveway of number 38, directly across from the soon-to-be vacant Whitfield house. New neighbors. They watched as a family emerged from an SUV behind the moving van, a mother, father, and 3 children ranging from about 5 to 15 years old. The oldest, a girl about Marcus's age, looked around curiously at her new surroundings. Without hesitation, Marcus stood up. "Come on," he said to his friends. "Let's go introduce ourselves." As they crossed the street, Echo trotting happily alongside, Marcus felt something settling into place inside him, a determination that what had happened to him would never happen to anyone else in Oak Ridge Heights. Not if he could help it. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he called out, extending his hand to the new family. "You're going to like it here. We look out for each other." And standing on that quiet suburban street, surrounded by newfound allies and friends, Marcus knew it was true. What had begun in fear and injustice had transformed into something powerful, a community united, vigilant not against outsiders, but against prejudice itself. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Patricia's lawsuit would drag on for months, and Marcus would still occasionally wake from nightmares of police lights and drawn weapons, but they would walk it together, step by step, just as they now walked their streets together. As the sun set on Oak Ridge Heights, casting long shadows across freshly cut lawns and newly planted "Hate Has No Home Here" signs, the neighborhood had been forever changed, wounded, healed, and ultimately strengthened by facing an ugly truth together. And in that shared recognition was a kind of hard-won hope, the knowledge that community, real community, isn't built on similarity or comfort, but on the courage to stand together when it matters most.